This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Gupta. I'm delighted that Surjit Bhalla has joined me today. To Indian audiences, Mr. Bhalla needs no introduction. He's at the moment the chairperson of the technical expert group for the first official household income survey for India. He's also been, of course, a renowned economist and indeed, until recently, India's representative to the IMF. Mr. Bhalla, welcome.
Thank you. Looking forward.
I want to begin by asking you how you see the tariffs, which is, of course, the biggest thing that everybody is discussing, that Donald Trump has applied on India. There are many issues related to the tariffs, which I want to discuss with you. But let's begin with your first reaction and how you see India's response to them.
Yeah. So there are two elements. How do I see the tariffs? And second is India's response. Now, very early on, I had, and I think before any tariffs were set by President Trump, but we knew that the tariffs were coming, that I'd said this could be, and had all the potential to be the second 1991 moment. By that, I meant then, and I mean today, is that it will provide us with an excuse, if you will, to initiate second generation reforms, which have broadly eluded us for the last 30 years. So that was my reaction then and remains my reaction today. Now, obviously, things have gotten a lot more complicated than the simple imposition of tariffs. There is the oil situation involved. But my view stays the same. We should not be looking at or worried about whether President Trump says something, or Navarro says something, or even China says something, or Russia says something. We know what we have to do, and that is to initiate the second generation reforms. So I wish and I'd hope that the government would stay on that limited path, and limited in quotes, because that is the only thing we can do, is to initiate domestic reforms. So I'm waiting for that to happen, and we can discuss as to why, what the likelihood of that happening is today. But it was a godsend, or Trump sent, when he put on the tariffs, or in terms of the negotiations. We should have gone ahead and done the reforms, or do the reforms.
You're absolutely right. I mean, no government, as they say, should ever allow a crisis to go away without exploiting it, without taking advantage of it. You should never
Yeah,
waste a crisis, so to speak.
yeah.
And India traditionally, of course, as many of us have always discussed, tends to
Mm,
always react well when it's really pushed into a corner. Now,
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what kind of second generation reforms you are talking about. Because, and I ask you this specifically because some of the main things that we've always discussed, Mr. Bhalla, which is agrarian reforms, land reforms. All of this has become more difficult in India. We saw a few years ago what happened when land reforms were really attempted, agrarian reforms were attempted, and then there was this whole pushback in the Punjab and so on and so forth, and it got mired in a lot of politics. Now, that has become a bit of a hot potato, but there are other things perhaps that India could do, and I wonder how you see the second generation reforms scenario from your vantage point.
Okay. Very good point. Let us look at agriculture, which you brought up, um, and which was on the anvil in 2021 and 22. Now, you know, basically, let's go back to 91 reforms. The one reform that the 91 reforms did not do, indeed made worse, was agriculture, the government involvement in agriculture. The Prime Minister Modi made an attempt in order to bring about agricultural reforms, and it so happened that uh, the deep state, as I call it, got together to prevent those reforms. Um, and the deep state got, luminaries and economic experts like Rihanna and Greta Thunberg to argue on their behalf. No, it is comic, but it's also extremely tragic that
Absolutely.
that happened.
Absolutely.
Further evidence that it was very, very tragic that, as you know, the Supreme Court asked did a survey after the reforms were put on, agricultural reforms were put on the back burner, and found out, asked the farmers. After all, we are concerned about the farmers. And 87% of the farmers said they believed in the agricultural reforms as suggested by Prime Minister Modi. So we have this unusual situation where the farmers want reforms and the government is not delivering. So that's, so therefore now one more element on this, or one more argument or one more development is that the Niti Aayog, Ramesh Chand, who's the agricultural expert and member at Niti Aayog, put out a paper which was on the Niti Aayog website. And I've read that paper, and that argued as to how agriculture, this was much before or while the entire discussion with the US was happening, as well as discussions with England, as well as discussions with the EU. And it's quite a detailed paper showing how well we have done in agriculture and in agricultural exports and how that could be developed further, expanded further. So you have the farmers wanting the reforms. Prior to 22, you had Prime Minister Modi and the BJP wanting the reforms. In 25, you have Niti Aayog arguing for agricultural reforms. Now, what gives? And therefore, I think it's a bit unfortunate that politicians are saying that they are really concerned about the farmers. And this is Hindol, this is your area. How is this
You and I, sir,
happening?
you and I have been discussing this for 20 years at the very least. As a young journalist from Fortune, has to come to interview you, and we used to discuss this. I remember that distinctly. I'm sure you remember it. We've been discussing this at the very least for 20 years.
Yeah. So that's the. Now, I have, if you permit me, Indol,
Sure, sure.
I've been bothered, like you have, and I've been trying to see why, no matter what government we get, we don't get the second generation reforms. Okay, there have been some reforms. We had GST reforms, and that's improving. And you said that we'd want to discuss, and absolutely. And then we had bankruptcy code, and then infrastructure. Certainly, the development in infrastructure has been quite impressive. But let me try out the following explanation as to why we are unlikely to get the second generation effects. And that is that everybody, the politicians, the farmers, especially the industrialists with their big protection, everybody and the BJP are very happy not doing anything. Not doing anything may be too extreme, but not rocking the boat, which is what a reform will do. And the reason is everybody is very comfortable. We are growing at 6.5%. The inequality, we can argue about whether how accurate the consumption inequality data was or was not. I have looked at it and I think it's broadly quite accurate or no less inaccurate than it was before. So you have low consumption inequality. So therefore, that tension is not there for reforms. You have a reasonable, steady growth. What you and I, let me speak for myself, but also at you, are really bothered by,
Yes, and
and
we're
I
all
have
bothered
been
by it. You're right.
constantly
Yes,
bothered, is much lower than what we are capable of, or
absolutely.
to put it in economic terms, much lower than our potential. That's what hurts. And especially when we compare ourselves to China, um, forget Russia, but China, India and China had the same per capita income for 500 years. They started their reforms in 1978. We started our reforms in 1991. So there is a 10 or 13-year lag. But, you know, they have the per capita growth in dollar terms is about 5 times, the per capita level, sorry, in dollar terms is about 5 times that of India. Their per capita income level in PPP terms is 2.5 times. So from being equal, now, and I think they have misused every trick in the book, for example, keeping a deeply undervalued exchange rate and all. And they have exploited and manipulated the WTO. And what do the Indian policymakers in the Ministry of Commerce? Oh, no, we have to, be WTO compliant. So much so that we have, even for polyester, something we should have and do have a deep comparative advantage. There is a 25% tariff on polyester. So I think, the there is, and as you know, in manufacturing, etc., we're way behind. Let me give you another, and haven't progressed. Apart from the comfort zone, and everybody is very comfortable not rocking the boat. Let us just, and I'm sure over the years we have discussed this. Look, the one area we have done exceedingly well, one broad area, is where the government has no role: software. Okay. And everything that the government has no role, we have done exceedingly well, better than anybody else in the world.
This is what Gurcharan Das used to tell you and me, if you remember, sir, that India grows at night, right? He even wrote a book called that.
Yeah. So, but it's not, that's what hurts.
Yeah,
That
right, right.
our potential is there, our demonstrated performance is there. And I don't see now the way things have gone on the trade deal. Um, I don't know. I am, my DNA was plus plus,
Mm.
and now it's reduced to just zero. So I hope we really
May I ask you,
succeed.
sir, do you think these tariffs will last for a long time? Because there's also another point of view that this is a blip. This will end more quickly than most people assume. Do
Yeah.
you believe that?
Well, yes. Look, well, there's a bit of hope in there, and a bit of wishful thinking. that really the India-US relationship is a very, very defining, special relationship of this century. So I 100% believe that, number one. Now, clearly it doesn't seem that way because now we are, I was born in independent India and I saw at a very young age Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. And then at not so young an age, I saw Hindi Chini Bye Bye. And now, it's a little bit unnerving to see Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai again. So, but I don't see, I think the India US relationship will reassert itself. I'll tell you, Hindol, what I'm really worried about. It reasserts itself. And does that mean we do the trade reforms? Or we'll find another excuse not to do it. So that's, I think, what anybody, one interesting point that I want to point out to your listeners is that I have read every article that has come out on tariffs by Indians, whether they are from the left or they are from the center, or they are from the right, or they are from the government, ex-government, or outside. All of them are saying the same thing. We must reform. So even our WTO representative for the last 14 years, right? He had an article about a week or 10 days ago arguing, we must do the trade reforms. If we look through all of that and we don't do it, I give up. I don't have an explanation other than my deep state explanation. And, which I'm happy to go into if you like. But that's the stranglehold. Now, if we were growing 3-4% or 5%, and as you mentioned, if we had a crisis, then we would be pushed like we did in 91. Matter of fact, there were Jagdish Bhagwati had been shouting, and all of us were shouting for reforms, and that we must do this, that, etc. And it was only 1991, Planning for Industrialization, Bhagwati Desai, 1970, one of the most classic books, and argued as to how wrong we were in pursuing the policies we did. But that was 40 years and didn't happen. So it was a deep crisis that made it happen. And now I thought that Trump was giving us a deep crisis because I think the relationship, economic and political relationship with the US is the most important one. And I thought we would go a step further. But so far it hasn't happened.
I'm going to ask you the deep state question in just a bit, but before that, I want to ask you about GST. The GST bringing down the slabs, as many people had been talking about for a long time, that it has all a next range of reforms are needed in GST. The slabs have to be brought down, and so on and so forth. We may not yet get the single GST, single a number that many people want, but how do you see this sort of reform, if I were to call it that?
I think while I welcome it, and I'll give you the reasons why I welcome it. Sometime back, and I think it would be last October, where I presented an analysis about that basically our tax rates were too high. Aggregate tax rates, and provided evidence that our tax to GDP ratio, and this is data provided by the IMF, etc., for all the countries in the world, they've aggregated all the taxes, and whether it's state, local, center, all taxes, and reported them for every year from 1980 onwards for every country. So very, very useful data set. So I looked at it and found out that the average tax to GDP ratio in East Asia was 13.5%. In China was 15%. And in Latin America was also low. Our tax to GDP ratio in 2024-25 was close to 19%. Put that in perspective, Korea is at 20 and the US is at 21. Now, this tax to GDP ratio excludes social security contributions because by definition, I mean, the IMF excludes it and all economists, that social security contribution is not a tax. You get back your contribution, whereas in this, it's a tax they're taking away. Now, I wrote about this, and to give the government and also our income tax rates were very high. The middle class, and I think you've written on it, the middle class was getting hurt. And so the government, I've been critical of the government in my assessment of reforms, but the government has been very forthcoming um, with the tax reforms. They had the income tax reform in February 1st, and now they have the indirect tax reform now. We had the corporate tax reform in 2019. So I think now, if we get down, we should get to about 16% maximum tax to GDP ratio. And it'll be still higher than Vietnam, still higher than China. But given that we have a certain attachment to high tax rates, I don't know. But so, bottom line, I really welcome this effort. It will reduce, I mean, all of us are working out the numbers, and I'm also in the same boat, but it's likely that our tax to GDP ratio will fall by about 2 percentage points from 19 to 17 or 16 even, or 18 and a half to 16 and a half. And maybe it's another percentage more. We don't know. But so I welcome it. Now, again, I'm afraid this is going to be should be a popular move. It'll help our growth rate. But I think, what I'm afraid of, that having done the right thing on taxes, the government will not be that enthusiastic about doing the right thing on reforms. So we have to wait and see. We might very well do it, in which case it's a win-win for all of us. But I welcome the move, for cutting GST as well as cutting income tax rates. But there's another. If we are interested in growth, which we are, and the government is, there is a phenomena that is happening both in India and everywhere else in the world, and that's a decline in inflation. RBI was very much behind the curve, 22, 24. But now the new RBI governor seems to be very proactive, so we'll have to wait and see. But basically, our real rates of policy or policy interest rates are very, very high. It should be, we are averaging about 2.5% to 3%, and it should be 1% or less. So we need to move somewhat aggressively, because you saw the GDP data, and 9% or 8.8%, whatever the number is, of nominal GDP growth is one of the lowest ever. And, you know, your stock market earnings, everything forecasts are all based on a slightly more robust um, nominal GDP growth. And the same phenomenon is happening elsewhere. So I think we need to recognize two things. One, a decline in inflation rates around the world. And a second is a decline in fertility rates around the world, which we can benefit from because we are, you know, whatever we call the dividend, demographic dividend, etc. We are one of the prime beneficiaries of that in this decade. So all the more reason to get back to that we should be doing the reforms. Everything, we've got things going for us. Why aren't we exploiting like China did, like Korea? I mean, you know, now you know where I stand.
Absolutely. As we wrap up the conversation, sir, that I want to, and it's the perfect segue to this, talk to me about your understanding of the deep state that prevents this from happening. I sense your, of course, we all feel the same frustration. I feel, I feel like you've spent your entire career talking about this. I feel even my entire career is now going talking about this, and
Yeah.
but we all sense the same frustration. But you mentioned your assessment of the deep state that prevents this from happening. Talk to me in conclusion a little bit about that.
Yeah. Okay. So the deep state is defined. I've tried to define it, etc. Is the major industrialists. And you know, the major industrialists around the world are the ones that control policy. Okay. You think that intellectuals dictate what policy should be, or politicians think that they dictate what policy should be. But it's really the major industrialists. Number one. In India, we also have a card carrying member of the deep state is senior policymakers, the IAS. Okay. And the IAS are a conservative lot, which is the most flattering term I can use for them. So they are conservative lost. They don't want to rock the boat. And they're also influenced, like everywhere else in the world, they're also influenced by the major industrialists. Then the third element in the deep state in India, not so much in the US, is a client media. So friendly media, they come out, whatever. So look at any issue you want to, and you'll find the hands of the major industrialists in it. The politicians sign off on the policy, but they're also heavily influenced by the deep state. And the executioners of policy are not the politicians, but are the IAS, the senior policymakers. Not all IAS, obviously, but these are senior policymakers who guide, regardless of the government, which is why the IS has remained the same. The major industrialists have stayed the same. So is it any wonder that we haven't got the reforms? So that's broadly, again, it comes from why aren't we getting the reforms?
Yeah,
And agricultural reforms, to go back where we started, agricultural reforms, 87% of farmers want it.
that's right. Absolutely.
Why?
No,
Why is that not being undertaken? So I think you have to ask whoever you want, and your show has to, why is this not happening?
no,
And
as
let me
always.
give you one more
Yes, please. Please.
example, and which
Yeah.
is everywhere around the world,
Mm.
is a uh, is an issue, and that is that um, the take, in our case, we would like exports or the manufacturing sector to perform. Forget exports for the moment. The manufacturing sector to perform. We have the agricultural sector is performing. The the services sector is performing. Even the infrastructure sector is performing, but the manufacturing sector is not performing, no matter what the definition. Okay, so why? So we have to ask, why is that not performing? And I don't know what, the you look at back to the comfort zone, you look at, take polyester, as I mentioned, has a 25% duty. That sector should, we should be really growing. Textiles, we lost out to Bangladesh, we lost out to Vietnam. So we need to ask these questions as to why we are not, we're performing in every other area except in manufacturing. And once you answer that question, you'll have the answers.
It's always extremely insightful talking to you, sir. As always, huge learning experience and, of course, extremely astute comments. Thanks very much for your time today, and I really appreciate
Yeah,
your time for joining me and having this conversation. As all of this develops, no doubt we'll have more opportunities to talk to you in detail about how you see this going forward. Thanks very much, Mr. Bhalla, for your time.
yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Indo.